Thanks for making the time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, you've been making the rounds, it seems like, and
Yeah.
hitting most of the state. We're a little bit different than most of the boards you've probably dealt with. Just Bill, myself, and Eric, our reporter, are Chronicle employees. The rest of these folks are volunteers.
Yeah.
And you might be aware
I've
of
met
how
your
we-
I've met your editorial board in the past.
all right. So
I was
you're-
in with Steve Barrett a few years ago to talk
Okay.
about some education stuff.
Gotcha. So these folks are all fairly new. They've been on the board for a couple months.
3 months.
Yeah.
3 months.
And so
Welcome.
Yeah.
So they're not too jaded just yet, but I'm sure they'll probably have good questions as well. So
Yeah.
if you'd like to, we talked about just if you wanted to basically tell us, why you're doing this and what you think you have to offer, and then we'll have
Great. I'd
questions
love
as well.
to, if it's okay to start with some introductions, if you don't
Absolutely.
mind going around.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
love to get a little background. I know, a number of people at the table, but
Sure.
and we've certainly worked together
Yeah,
for over
yeah.
a decade or 2 decades or so.
Yeah, probably 15 years.
Yeah,
probably,
at least.
right?
Yeah.
Right, so,
Good.
I'm Nick Eli. I've been the editor here since 2008, and I've worked at the Chronicle since 2000.
Mhm. Great.
I'm Bill Wilkie. Just write the editorials now, but I've been with the Chronicle since '89, so a long time.
And you've always been in Bozeman, Bill?
No, I lived in Helena for 3 years before that, lived in Havre for a year and a half before that, and lived in Libby for 10 years before that.
Okay. Yeah.
Bill used to have my job
Mm-hmm.
ways back, but
2004 was when I stepped in, 11 years ago.
Yeah. Great.
I'm Don Beeman, former CEO of Legasite. Greg, we've talked a number of times over the years.
Sure.
Thanks for your support, and look forward to hearing how you look at contributing in this possible role coming up.
Yeah, great. Good to see you, Tom.
I'm Eric Petrick. I'm our city government reporter most of the time, featuring today on our Politics Beat.
And are you originally from Montana?
No, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, Nemaseo alum.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Go Cats.
Yeah.
Did you want to
Oh,
introduce yourself?
me? No, me.
No, us.
Aaron Flint, I'm Communications Director of the Craig's campaign, so happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm Renee Gavin, and I'm one of the volunteer citizen board members, editorial board members. I've lived in Bozeman. We moved here in 1982, so I'm almost a local. I've obviously seen a lot of changes
Yeah.
over the decades that I've been here. My husband and I have owned several different small businesses, and I've worked in a number of different capacities, and I'm also a recovering lawyer.
And what do you do to recover from that?
How do you recover?
Yeah.
You never really do.
Okay.
You just move on.
Hi, I'm Dave Swingle. I've met you at functions and operate the combos.
Mhm.
I helped start the alternative school here in town. I've been with the museum for more than 50 years. And my wife and I, between the two of us, we counted it up. We now have 96 years between us in public education.
Yeah, your bio said only 91, so
We realized
the clock is speeding up.
we missed 3 years in Detroit.
Okay.
Okay, I'm Richard Broom. I've been living in Bozeman full-time about 5 years now. I've been coming here about over 22 of my 4 children are Montana State graduates. I had a military career of 27 years. I was on Wall Street, mostly as a consultant for about 19 years, mostly within information technology. I was director of the Army Computer Science School at one time, and retired. I failed at that after about 6 months, and so went back to work writing, and I now teach at the university. I teach at the College of Business, leadership, strategy, things like that.
Okay, great. And how long have you been in Gallatin Valley?
Coming here over 20, lived here full-time 5. My son's a local businessman, he stayed, and so we decided to retire to here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually started my career in Bozeman as an adjunct faculty member.
Is
at
that right?
LSU. Yeah,
Yes.
that was my
What's
first
honest?
job.
Doesn't pay anything, but it's honest.
Yeah, actually, in the end, I got replaced by a light bulb.
Did you?
That's a different story, so it's another time.
And full disclosure, I was on Aaron's show a couple of times, talking about cybersecurity on his show.
Yeah, good.
So this group, I mean, they haven't been on the board for long. We typically get, I think this time, about 60 applicants for this job. So And as I've mentioned, it pays absolutely nothing. So we get a really good group of folks and try to get a good balance of people and their backgrounds.
And it's really unique amongst the papers in the state in
Yeah.
terms of how you do it, so.
I think it's a good thing, and it's, so as Bill and I joke about that, it's not just he and I in a room thinking stuff up. It's I think a much better balance of
It's 5 times that.
exactly. So anyway, with that,
Yeah, great. So I'll assume nothing and give you a little more background. So I first fell in love with Montana 40 years ago. I had a junior high school science teacher who actually flew P-51s in World War II and trained up at Maelstrom. And I grew up in Pennsylvania. The only way he could afford to come here every summer was to bring a whole bunch of ninth graders with him. So we loaded up the vans and drove from Pennsylvania to Red Lodge. And then we spent the whole summer. That was in 1976. I was in ninth grade and knew that I wanted to make a life in Montana. So when I had the opportunity, my wife and I loaded up the Bronco with our 3 boys who are still in diapers. That was 21 years ago. Moved to the home we still live in today. And then she was actually pregnant with Rachel when we moved out. So we've been in the same home here in Bozeman for 21 years, just north of town. And I tell you a quick story about Rachel. Rachel was born here, was gone off to college, so we're empty nested. And she left the state to go to college. She's like her mother, she's really smart. So she got into Stanford. And she came home at spring break last spring, her freshman year, and said, "Dad, there's a rumor about me going around campus." And I said, "Rachel, what's that?" And she said, "Well, they know I'm from Montana, and they're telling everyone that I killed a bear with my bare hands." And I said, "Rachel, what did you tell them?" And she said, "Well, I told them it wasn't true. I told them I had gloves on." So I was quite proud of her.
Yeah.
And it's a great rumor for a dad to have about his daughter
Yeah,
going
yeah.
on campus,
Yeah,
so that was
yeah.
fun.
So I'm a father with a daughter, I'd want her to tell me, "No, that's absolutely true."
Yeah. So anyway, we had this idea. I'm an electrical engineer by training. My master's is in computer science. I've always been in the software industry, and you know much of the Right Now story, but we started in our home, my wife and I. We had no outside financing. We had this idea that we could start a global business in a rural state like Montana. And back in 95, 97, when we started, there were still retail shops on Main Street that were not occupied. And we certainly don't have that issue anymore in downtown Bozeman. We started that business, and we doubled revenue and employees every 90 days for years at a time. Ultimately became the largest commercial employer here in Bozeman. Our average wage was almost $90,000 a year, and you know the story, right? I mean, the thing that was most amazing is that business started an economic engine here in the valley. That in 2014, according to BBER, 40% of all the wage growth in the entire state occurred in Gallatin County. And I'm not saying we're totally responsible for that, but we had a big hand in doing that. There's now been dozens of technology spin-outs that have come out of Right Now Technologies. We took that company public in 2004. As you know, it was acquired by Oracle in 2012. Proud of the fact that every single employee that wanted a job got a job. We just broke ground here late last fall on another building for Oracle. So Oracle continues to hire and expand. They now have 120,000 square feet of space here in Bozeman. And this new building is kind of exciting. It's a network operations center that'll be their global command center for all of their data centers all over the world for 8 hours every day. There's one in Asia. This is the only one in North America, and then there'll be one in London, England. So that's kind of a cool deal for Bozeman. And they're going to use it as a customer visitor center, so they're going to fly all their top customers in for dog and pony shows. So that'll be good for retail and all this other stuff. So you asked a very good question. Why am I running? Really simply, as a dad, I want my kids around the table on Sunday afternoon. And I don't want to have to get on an airplane to go to my grandkids' ball games and recitals. And yet, even with the prosperity we're enjoying in Gallatin Valley here, Montana as a whole is 49th in the country in wages, and too many of our young people have to leave. I think with the Montana work ethic and the rich natural resources we have, and our quality of life, there's no reason why we can't do better. And I think the missing ingredient there is really leadership. When we came here, people said, you can't do that here. And for me, as an engineer, that kind of just gets me fired up about, hey, maybe we can do better. So I'm looking forward to bringing leadership to Helena. I've never run for public office, but I think that bringing business leadership, I think we can chart a course that will create better outcomes for all Montanans. So that's why I'm doing it. When elected, there's really 4 things I would focus on, and I'll hit them real quickly.
Great.
Number 1, we need more high-wage jobs in Montana. That is the root issue in my mind, and that's what's been confirmed as I've done hundreds and hundreds of meetings all over the state. I think the path there, the single largest opportunity we have is responsible natural resource development. And you have to have balance in these things. The pendulum has swung so far to one side that we can't get permits out of DEQ at the state level. We've seen a lot of federal overreach with Washington dictating how we manage our natural resources. I think that's a problem. I think we ought to have an administration that's willing to speak up for Montanans. So within high-wage jobs, natural resources is number 1. Number 2 is really agriculture, which is our number 1 industry in the state. We need to continue to support and promote it, but we're not getting any more land. So that's not a huge growth opportunity for us unless we do vertical integration, which we ought to be pursuing. But we have to look at some new segments for additional growth, whether that be manufacturing, and we have a growing manufacturing sector in the state. Yet as I talk to manufacturers, they can't find people with skills, right? So this is a challenge really in most industries. Doesn't matter if it's healthcare or manufacturing or probably newspapers too. I mean, it's hard to find people. I think technology represents an opportunity. Now, we started a nonprofit trade association 2 years ago in the state, not really knowing how big the high-tech sector was. And we learned now, we have 260 firms that are a member of this Montana High-Tech Business Alliance. The U of M did an economic impact study just released here a couple of weeks ago. It's 15% of the state economy growing 7 times faster than the state economy and creating jobs that are double the median. I think this is goodness, you know, and we ought to be encouraging that. The last area of jobs is really this concept of telecommuting, and I put a lot of energy into that last summer. And I think about rural Montana in particular, where, you know, a farm family, you know, would have 3 kids, 1 gets the farm, 2 have to leave. Because these communities, they're historically have been strictly agricultural based. Well, with telecommuting, which is really just the ability to work remotely over the internet, this is a way to keep our families together. Montana is now number 1 in the country in telecommuting, and yet we have had no organized campaigns really to encourage our kids to come back home and bring jobs with them. I would do that as governor. I had a gal come up to me in Butte recently and give me a big hug, and I was kind of surprised because I didn't know her that well. And she said, I said, well, it's nice to meet you too, ma'am. And she said, well, you don't understand. You see, my daughter Jennifer got one of your invitations to come home. And we mailed almost 20,000 of these invitations. And she said, you know, and her husband sat down, they lived in Seattle, and talked about it and said, why can't we do this? Jennifer Hewlin now lives in Bozeman, and Sue Hewlin, her mother, said to me, thank you for bringing my grandbabies back home. You know, so I would wage an all-out campaign in Montana to bring Montanans home, because if I talk to them, they do want to come home, but the issue's always been they don't have jobs. Oracle alone has over 1,000 jobs open today that could be filled in any community in Montana, and they average $100,000 each. But that drives me to my second point, which is education. And I know Dave has been near and dear to your heart for a long time. It is with me as well. It's how we need to prepare our young people for the jobs of the future. So number 1 is jobs, number 2 is education. This is why we started, I think computers are here to stay, and we should be putting computer science in our high schools. I'm a fan of, I think it was Florida that just made computer science an alternative foreign language requirement for high school graduation. I think that's a good idea. We started the whole Code Montana program, where we bought curriculum and made it available to all middle schools and high schools in the state free of charge. And that's really had an impact. I mean, between that and the Looney the Robot program and our STEM teacher training that we funded at MSU here, we've seen a 54% increase in computer science enrollment at MSU just in the last 2 years. And that was a problem because when we were running Right Now Technologies, we couldn't get enough techies. In fact, in 2013, there were only 40 computer science graduates in the whole state of Montana. That's U of M, Montana Tech, and MSU combined. So I'm thrilled that we're seeing the progress that we're seeing. Montana Tech's up 53%, and U of M's up 27%. So it's a statewide issue. We made a concerted effort to build programs to build demand for computer science, and it's working. The second part is I think we do also push too many young people into four-year degree programs. And that's why we've been such strong proponents of Gallatin College and our trades education. We created a manufacturing scholarship program that benefits veterans and lower income Montanans to get skills in welding and machining, because as I talk to manufacturers or construction people, they just can't find people with skills. And these are jobs that allow you to support a family. So those are a couple ideas on education. So it's jobs, it's education. Number third is accountability in state government, and also return to a culture of customer service. What we did at Right Now Technologies was help large multinational firms adopt cultures of customer service. And it's probably one of the number one things I've heard as I've done all these town hall meetings. People, our state agencies, many of them, have adopted a culture of enforcement rather than customer service. And we need to change that. The purpose of government is to serve the people, not the other way around. So this would be a focus of mine. I've talked about it many times publicly. I think we have good state employees who work hard and want to do the right thing, but today they're not led well. And so I would appoint new agency heads who have actually walked in the shoes of the people they're trying to serve. Our head of Department of Labor today has never had an employee. I don't think that necessarily gives them the right skills to run that agency. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality, we can't process a permit in any reasonable amount of time. You know, you look at the Montanore mine up in Libby, they've been waiting 11 years for that permit. And it's just hard to fathom that it could take that long to process a permit. Now, I don't think we should say yes to every permit, but we should be able to say yes or no in less time than 11 years. I think the most outrageous example of mismanagement and poor leadership was the fact that we, as a state, took $86 million from Arch Coal for the Otter Creek tracks and then never issued them a permit. And now Arch Coal is in bankruptcy. Now, I'm not saying they're directly tied to each other, but they're not unrelated either. And I'm concerned about the message that sends to corporations who are considering investment in the state of Montana. It's not a welcome mat. The other part is accountability. When I was running Right Now Technologies, we were publicly traded for 8 years, and every 90 days I had to sign a letter that said if we screwed up the financials, I would face personal criminal charges. And Susan Carstensen and then Jeff Davison and I, every 90 days we signed that letter, and for 8 years. And that was our obligation. And yet we have a current governor who lost $1 billion off the state balance sheet last year, had 125 accounting errors, and not only did no one go to jail, no one even got reprimanded. So there's a dual set of standards in state government which has got to stop. We need to bring accountability back to state government. And then we've talked somewhat about tax policy. We'll probably get into it a little more here as we have a conversation, but the state of Montana has overcharged Montana taxpayers. We have almost a $500 million surplus up in Helena right now. We have a weak economy. We're seeing lower commodities prices. I think Montanans would know how to spend their hard-earned money. There were 3 bills passed by the legislature last year. Our current governor vetoed all 3 of them. And I think there were some good ideas there. They probably have to be tweaked a little bit, but I'm in favor of returning money to Montanans who have earned it, rather than keep it in a pile up in Helena someplace. So it's jobs, education, accountability, and customer service in state government, and then lastly is healthcare. And this is an area I've been spending a lot of time coming up to speed. I'm an engineer. I'm not a doctor or practitioner, but engineers like to solve problems, and So I was on the phone today with the president of a hospital system and the head of the hospital association, and been visiting with other folks. I think in healthcare, we need to preserve quality of care. We need to preserve rural access, which is particularly important in our smaller communities. But we've also got to figure out how to bring costs down. Today in Montana, 1 in 7 people work in healthcare. That's up from 1 in 11 just 20 years ago. And when everybody in this room works in healthcare, there's not going to be anybody left to plant the wheat or chase the cows around. So we've got to get healthcare costs. And it's also the case, I think of every one of these things, whether it's a regulation or a tax or increasing healthcare costs, as another brick that we throw in the backpack of a small business owner. And I come to this job with a philosophical belief that jobs and opportunities are only created in the private sector. They're not created by government programs. We didn't succeed at Right Now Technologies because of any government handouts or government programs. And as we layer regulations on top of regulations, as we add tax burden, as we add healthcare costs, it's just harder for a small business person in Montana to even stand up with a backpack on anymore. And I think that's an issue. The big news this week is I did officially file with the Secretary of State on Monday to run. And in doing that, identified my lieutenant governor candidate, which I'm thrilled about, that Leslie Robinson has joined me. Leslie has been, was one of the youngest people on the Montana Stock Growers Board, elected a long time ago. She's been active there for 20 years. She's a county commissioner up in Phillips County for 11 years. And she's been very active in national Association of Counties work. And the reason I selected her is really two points. One is she understands rural Montana. She's a 4th generation rancher out of Phillips County. She grew up in Malta. Her and her husband ranch just near Zortman. So rural issues is very important. And secondly, she's been very active in as a county commissioner. And she understands local issues. And I think we need to build a bridge between state government and local government. We saw some of the controversy that went on around infrastructure, and boy, there's a lot of people hurting out there because of sewer systems that aren't working, water systems that aren't working, and I think we need to do a better job. So I'm thrilled with Leslie joining the ticket, and we're going to run as a team. I think we complement each other extremely well. And the last thing I'll just make a comment here, then happy to go wherever you want to take the conversation, is this. You'll notice in my comments, I haven't used any labels. I think we've had a lot of divisiveness in state government, both within parties and across parties, and I think it has really no place. So I've made a commitment to not use labels, just to talk about issues. I think the fact that we're 49th in the country in wages is not a Democrat issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's a Montana issue. And we ought to get everybody around the table and have a robust conversation. Apply some common sense and some elbow grease and go fix it. So that's my plan for Montana.
Okay. Questions, folks?
Let me start off. I told you I teach 2 subjects. I want to ask you a leadership question and a strategy question. I teach leadership at the college. I've led in business, I've led in the government. There's differences. You're certainly going to find a different environment if you become governor. How do you plan to approach leadership and as a governor, as opposed to being a business where you have a little more direct influence about how things get done?
Yeah, so you have to recognize the differences because you don't have as many levers at your disposal. For me, the most important thing is leadership. Not only my leadership, but appointment of leadership. This is why I've made it a priority to talk about who am I going to put in charge of the agencies, who's going to be on my team. I'm a big fan of Jim Collins, and his expression is first who, then what, right? So leadership is number one. I also think people without a vision tend to perish. Mission focus is really incredibly important. To understand what are we trying to accomplish. So in every area that I focus on, whether it was in business as I built this organization from me and my wife in an extra bedroom in our house to 1,100 people, or in maybe some nonprofit work I was involved with, or governmental work when I get to Helena, is first you got to get the right people in place. Number two, you have to have clarity of vision. And no matter what issue it is, like in education, for example, I think the goal that we can all agree on is that we've got to help every young person reach their full potential. In healthcare, I shared with you, it's really, We need to preserve quality, rural access, and we got to bring costs down. So it's first leadership, then clarity of mission, and then after that, it's common sense and elbow grease.
Okay, let me ask you my strategy question. I've heard, certainly you're a very successful entrepreneur, no question about that. And you also know it takes time, took you time to do it, but you eventually you were becoming very successful. In the telecommunications piece, I understand, because now we can do that more. But again, it takes time for that to develop and grow. For more rapid growth for Montana, to get these jobs here quickly, I think attracting companies to come here is really the faster thing, and attracting the right kind of companies to come here. High-tech companies is what I would prefer, because they're low impact on the environment to do that, but bring good, high-paying jobs. What would be your strategy around trying to attract businesses to Montana? Yeah,
so that's a really good question. We may have a little bit of disagreement on method, because I think, honestly, my belief is there's been an awful lot of economic, and let me say clearly, I'm in favor of companies coming here and starting up.
Sure.
That being said, an awful lot of economic development effort for a long time has been focused on trying to find these white knights who will come in and hire a couple hundred people. The alternative approach is the one that we've historically pursued, which is entrepreneurs here in Montana start businesses, whether it's what I did or what Chris Nelson did at Zoot, or what Ray Thompson did up in the Flathead with Semi-Tool, or the Leach brothers up in Great Falls with Lowenbro. I'm a big fan of us starting and growing. And this is the interesting thing to me, this high-tech business alliance, which I think represents one of the biggest opportunities we have for high-wage job growth in the state. There's 260 members. Most members have 10 or less employees. Well, if each one of those 260 firms added 2 employees next year, that's a lot of jobs. And I also think about smaller communities in Montana. Like I was just up in Malta last night. You know, we've been exporting kids out of Montana for decades. In a town like Malta, if we could get a handful, 6, 5 Montanans to come home each year and bring a job with them that they did remotely over the internet, that would be 6 families buying or building homes, which would create construction jobs. It would be 6 families that would be enrolling their kids in the local school. It would be 6 families shopping downtown. I actually think that is probably one of the lowest risks, fastest path to economic growth. Now, as governor, I will be an advocate for Montana. I will do everything in my power to recruit businesses to come here. But I think there's a couple of parallel paths that actually have a faster path to economic development. And the other priority I would have is in creating a business environment that is friendly to all Montana businesses. I'm not a big fan of special deals for special companies. I'd like to lower the burden for everybody. And that's why I've been a proponent for example, getting rid of the business equipment tax. We may have to phase it out over time, but I think that's probably one of the most regressive tax policies we have.
Okay. All my colleagues weigh in.
I have a question. There's a movement throughout the West, I think it mainly started in Utah, but there's some Montanans involved in it, who are advocating that the federal government turn over public lands to states. Where do you stand on that issue?
Yeah, so that's a really important question, because I'm a big outdoors guy. I love our public lands. That's part of what brought me to Montana originally. There's also no question, if you talk to people who work with various agencies that manage land in Montana, the state does a better job than the federal government does. Now that might be a little bit about the regulatory environment, these sorts of things. I am opposed to deed transfer at this time, because I don't think it's attainable. I am a proponent for increased state management of federal lands on a pilot basis. There's some proposals floating, particularly up in Lincoln County, where we have probably some of the highest unemployment rates in the state, where under a pilot project, either the county commissioners or some new commission that gets set up would actually manage federally deeded lands under contract with the federal government. I would be a proponent of projects like that, because I think it's the way we can bring better management to these lands. Because what we're doing right now is not working. I mean, we're burning these forests every summer, and if we could actually start managing our federal lands, the forests would be healthier, we'd have more wildlife, there'd be increased hunting opportunities, we'd have less forest fires, and we'd have a reasonable flow of timber to our mills, which we've been losing jobs in the timber industry, close to 700 here just in the last 12 months.
So Greg, you talked about attracting different companies to Montana. What's that package look like? Because it's got to compete against Colorado and California, and competition's tough
Yeah.
to get new companies to come here. Better to start them here, but there again, incentives sometimes make a difference. How do you look at that package of tools or resources to attract or help develop companies here in Montana?
Well, I think there's a number of things. First, I think the biggest advantage for being in Montana is the Montana work ethic, which is unsurpassed. We saw it in our business. It just kind of knocks the socks off everybody else. I had a young man that we shipped off to London, England. He was from Dillon, and he did a multi-million-dollar installation for British Telecom. And the exec, it was like a 4-month project, and the exec called and said, "We've never had a project come in on time and under budget. Where do you get these guys?" And I said, "We get them in Montana." And I was proud of that. He's now back in Dillon. He started a technology business. I think they're up to 30 or 40 employees here in the state. I think this is a path. So we have missed opportunities in the current administration to use the overpayment of taxes as a way to make the business climate more favorable. I am not a big fan of special deals for special companies. I think we need to lower the bar for everybody. I would be a fan of, there was tax legislation in this last session that would have reduced income tax rates and cap gains rates. I'm in favor of that. It was essentially revenue neutral. I think it cost about $20 million a year. The business equipment tax, is a holdover from the days when most of our industrial interests were out-of-state mining companies, and maybe it made sense back then. But today, it's just a wet blanket on capital investment. It hurts farmers, it hurts manufacturers, it hurts high tech, it hurts timber, it hurts mining, and it prevents job creation. I am a fan of getting rid of that tax entirely. Now, it raises about $75 million a year, so it's a $150 million hit over a biennium. But I'll tell you an example about a local company here in Livingston. You probably know them if I tell you the rest of the story, but they bought a big digital press. They're a digital printer over there. And that one investment created 20 jobs. Created sales jobs, created graphic design jobs, it created pre-production people, customer service jobs, and then shipping jobs. 20 jobs, one capital investment. And the business equipment tax on that one piece of equipment was $300,000 over 10 years. And I don't want to speak out of school, but the hurdle rate is very high to buy a second digital press, given that experience. I would work to eliminate the business equipment tax. I want to make it easier for everybody to start businesses.
Makes sense. One other question, different direction completely. The resources that came to the universities for research and development, 15 million in that neighborhood, where does that fall on your radar as something you find attractive, or is that sort of maybe could have been used a different way than it was?
I helped a couple of groups apply for grants for that money. I haven't studied exactly how it got allocated. I have a deep commitment to education. Currently, the state of Montana, and all of us as taxpayers, pay about 40% of the university budget. Now, okay, that's good. We're keeping the cost of tuition down. And honestly, what we did at Right Now Technologies was in large part because we had a close relationship with MSU here. We hired 25% of the graduating class of computer scientists every year, right? So that was a good outcome. And 45% of our employees were MSU grads. So the universities are huge engines of growth for the state, but there's always room for improvement. But I haven't studied the specifics of how the 15 million got allocated.
Fair enough.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is sort of a two-part question. The first
Sure.
part is, what are your views on the future of coal as a resource here in the state and its part in the economy? And after you answer that, what are you going to do to promote renewables?
Yeah, so good question, and extremely important for all of Montana. I think that coal plays a vital role, and we've there are two issues. I mean, the kind of the epicenter right now is Colstrip, and I've been out there and I've done town hall meetings at Colstrip and visited with people. Coal is a big part of our economy today in the state. It's about, if we lose Colstrip, we'll lose about 7,000 jobs here in the state, and electric bills for all of us will go up by 16% or so, according to the University of Montana. I think we can burn coal cleanly. We have about a third of North America's reserves here in Montana. We've seen the innovation in oil and gas with we thought here even 15 years ago we're going to run out of oil and gas in North America, and we certainly don't have that problem anymore. That being said, I think coal ought to compete with all other energy sources. And so I'm a fan of all of the above, as long as they're competing on an equal basis. I think that I don't think the federal government should be shutting down the coal industry, because I think that's bad for Montana, and I think it's going to hurt a lot of people.
Does it seem like, just following up with that, that's going to be a choice for Montana, with other states that purchase our coal, that purchase that energy, that are saying, hey, we don't want that.
Yeah.
We want you to do something cleaner.
Yeah.
How does Montana deal with that long term?
Well, I think there's been a lot of mistakes made by our current governor in this regard. And there are two issues in Colstrip, and you're right, there's an economic issue. We have a factory that produces a product, and the customer doesn't want to buy it anymore. Right? So if I were governor, I would have brought the owners of that plant together and looked for alternative buyers. I mean, that's a 2,500 megawatt plant in Colstrip, between all four, 1 through 4. And I think it's about 1,100 megawatts goes out of the state to Puget Sound or wherever it goes. I'd be looking for alternative buyers. At the end of the day, if you ever have a situation where you have a factory that's producing a product and somebody doesn't want to buy it, that's not a sustainable situation. Yeah. So there's an economic issue with Colstrip. There's also a regulatory issue. I mean, this whole costly power plan, which is basically, and Montana was singled out. I mean, we were singled out for the highest carbon reduction of any state in the country at 47%. And the challenge with that, and for me that's more, you can argue about, is this good or bad? The reality is, even by the EPA's work, it's going to have negligible to no impact on the environment. When you look at it, even by their estimates, they're talking about 0.02 of a degree improvement in the environment between now and 2100. And you compare it with the fact that 1 year of forest fires in Montana produce over 1,000 years of Colstrip particulate and carbon into the atmosphere. We've got the tail wagging the dog. So we've got a regulatory issue, and we've got an economic issue. And in terms of Montana's economic future, we got to work both of those.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I travel the state quite a bit in several capacities, and I deal with Indian reservations, and I see a great deal of poverty. When you look at a night map of the United States or the world, you see all these glowing areas where the cities and urbanization take power, but you see flyover country too. And Montana has its bright spots in the university towns and commercial centers like buildings. But the people living out there, especially in the northwest and essentially east of the Rockies, are very poor. Their school system's marginal, certainly not updated electronically as they should be. What can be done administratively through your state office to help get people up out of the grinding, destructive, meth-addicted poverty that prevails throughout the state?
Yeah.
The college towns are fine, but most of the state is really ill.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you on our tribal communities, and I've spent a bunch of time there. I've been up in Rocky Boy. I've done economic development seminars there. I've been in Hayes and Harlem. I spent a couple of days this past fall up in Fort Peck. I've done entrepreneurial seminars on the Northern Cheyenne. I was just up on the Blackfeet. I was just at Salish Kootenai College here recently. So it's a problem that's been on my heart for a long time, and I share your concern. It's a really hard problem. I think that the best way to lift people out of poverty is with a strong economy that creates jobs for people. And this is where I've been working. I had an experience up in Hayes, Montana, which is in the middle of the Fort Belknap Reservation, which you're probably familiar with. And I ran a entrepreneurial seminar there because I found that as I go into communities, whether they're tribal communities or even our other communities, if I get a group of students together and ask them, how many of you have ever thought of starting your own business? No hands go up. It's like, you know, if you believe that jobs and opportunity are created by the private sector, well, if we don't have entrepreneurs starting businesses, we're not going to have a private sector. So anyway, a short story. I had this gentleman come up to me in Hayes and say, Mr. Gianforte, I want to start a business. I want to start a restaurant. Will you give me a bunch of money so I can open up a restaurant? And I said, well, no. But if you'll work with me, I'll coach you through the startup process. And I have this bootstrapping book, and I've lectured. We've started all 5 of our businesses with no outside money. And I've lectured at most of the top business schools in the country on this concept. I've never actually, the students always like my presentation, but I've never been invited back because it's so contrary to what's taught in business schools. But this gentleman said, will you give me this money? I said, well, how about I coach you through it? And I said, well, I don't think you can do it without a lot of money because I got to buy kitchen equipment, I have to rent a building. And I said, well, how about this? You have a Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Hayes. And are there a bunch of people that work in that office building? He said, yes. I said, well, why don't you go over there on a Tuesday and take orders for lunch for Thursday and get deposits? And then go to the grocery store, get the groceries, cook the meals in your home. He actually had his kids help him, and deliver the meals on Thursday. That first week he sold 30 lunches at $10 each. And then he got a catering job that weekend that he also did. And he was in business. Now, the challenge, as you are well aware, on Fort Belknap or Rocky Boy or many of these other reservations, there is no economic activity outside of government programs. If you take Rocky Boy, there's 4,000 people there. There's not a single commercial establishment on the entire reservation. You go to Winifred, which is just south of the Missouri there, and there's 26 commercial businesses in Winifred. So I don't have the exact solution for you, but I think there are certain things that need to be in place for a private sector to thrive. It includes respect to property rights. It includes consistent rule of law. You need to eliminate nepotism. And you need to have a culture that celebrates success. And there's a number of other things. And not all of those ingredients exist in our tribal communities. It has to be a partnership with the tribal leadership, because the last thing the tribal communities want is another white guy showing up telling them what to do. That's not the solution. But in partnership, I think there's a lot we can do to move the ball forward.
What do you think about the notion of entrepreneurial startups, getting more people involved? You've done a lot of stuff in that regard already. Is it industry focused? And we've talked about focus being our friend. Is it industry focused that really could drive it, or should we dabble in other areas that are maybe not as well established here but could become attractive, or is it some average of all that?
Well, I think each community has certain attributes that should be leveraged. It's sort of like you have to play with the hand that you've been dealt. I mean, Bozeman tends to be the software center. You go to the Flathead, that's the manufacturing center. Butte is starting to do more and more with heavier manufacturing, with the GE joint partnership with CCast over there. Billings has a more diversified economy. We have to just kind of look at these things. I think rural communities, the biggest opportunity we have is telecommuting to complement agriculture. But I think the first thing, I had this experience, I shared it a little earlier, we're just not teaching our young people that entrepreneurship is a career path. I was in Butte recently, at Butte Central. I had 200 students, and I asked the question, how many of you have ever thought of starting your own business? And like, no hands went up. And then we got talking about it. My message was really simple. It was, don't let anybody ever tell you anything's impossible. You can start a business, and you can prosper in Montana. And you should have seen these high school students just come alive, raise their hands. It's like, Mr. Gianforte, that prosper thing, could you go over it one more time? I want to know more about that. You know, and not that everybody's going to be an entrepreneur. We don't need everybody to be an entrepreneur, but we need some of them to be entrepreneurs. So focus could help, but that basic ingredient of entrepreneurship is the place to start, I think.
So on a land use perspective, what, in your mind, what should the state be doing to manage growth? Kind of like we're seeing here in the Gallatin Valley, you know, residential growth, commercial growth. You know, how would you change the, or are there portions of state law that you would change or want to see changed, you know, in terms of regulating that?
In terms of land use?
Yeah, like particularly exempt wells, you know, septic regulation, stuff that goes through state agencies.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, we have regulations in place for good reasons to protect the environment. These state agencies, I mentioned this earlier, have adopted a culture of enforcement rather than customer service. And the first step I'd take is get some leadership in these agencies who can actually work with contractors. Because when we make it hard to get permits for projects, it drives up the cost of housing for everybody. And you know, certainly here in the Gallatin Valley, we have that issue. It's getting more and more expensive. The more regulations, the more rules you layer on, the more expensive housing becomes. And that's certainly a challenge here in Gallatin Valley. Now, I'm not suggesting eliminate all rules, right? But the pendulum has swung. It's sort of like if we had no rules, we'd have anarchy. If we have too many rules, we have strangulation and certainly higher costs. What I'm suggesting is just more balance in the process.
Okay, so in terms of DEQ, what industries would you look at for in terms of defining a leader there that would be?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'd need somebody who's actually walked in the shoes of the people they're trying to serve. It's probably an environmental engineer who has some business experience. I don't have a particular person in mind, but we'll cast a broad net. This is what I've done my whole career, right, as we mentioned at the beginning here, the number one thing in leadership is picking the right team. So the first step is to identify the requirements and then do a broad search and find the best qualified person that you can convince to take the position.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
It's you know, we're very obviously focused on Montana, and
Yeah.
that certainly makes sense. But the nation and the world has a whole host of global problems facing us that touch Montana.
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is, what wakes you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and worries you?
I sleep really well.
Yes, but on vacation you don't, right? And
Yeah.
something starts to eat at you. What do you feel is something that's out there that really should worry us?
Well, again, I don't think they're state issues. You know, I think one of the primary roles of our federal government is national security. And there's a lot of unrest, and not everybody's your friend out there. I'm particularly concerned about who's going to be our next leader in Washington, and are they going to be able to protect us long term?
You're going to be the head of a military force that you control as a governor and have homeland security responsibilities in the state, protect the citizens. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's the number one responsibility that a governor has,
Yeah.
is safety of the people. You know, so I don't have all the answers.
Certainly, I
What
don't
I've done,
expect you to.
what I've done in my entire career is hire competency, and then have a good team of advisors around me.
Greg, we've talked a little bit about infrastructure. I'm wondering if during the last session there was an argument about whether we should use money that's in the bank or if we should rely on bonding to pay for infrastructure that the state needed. What would have your position been on that?
Yeah, so we have really not had leadership in Helena around infrastructure. We had, the current governor vetoed a bill in 2013, and then due to a lack of leadership, probably spreads around a little bit, we didn't get a bill approved in the 2015 session. I don't have a philosophical position on bonding versus cash. I would say, though, if we have cash, we should use cash. I was out in Culbertson here recently, and you know, a single-family home in Culbertson, the water bill is $1,200 a year, and it's going up 18% this year. People in these small communities, particularly in eastern Montana, are getting hammered, especially the ones on fixed income. So we need leadership in Helena that's going to get an infrastructure package passed. If we have excess funds, I would be a fan of using the cash rather than bonding, because I don't think we should kick the can down the road. But we've kicked the can down the road for the last 4 years. We have some urgent needs in communities around water, sewer, bridges, and roads that this next session has to deal with.
Okay.
I have a question about school and education.
Yep.
You touched on that earlier. Can you just describe your approach to public education, private education, charter schools, all of the different options that are out there? which ones you like, which ones you don't like, how they interact with each other.
Sure. So this has been an area of passion for me for a long time. I've served on a number of national boards related to K through 12 education, and certainly had some experience here in the Valley with this, and I've raised 4 kids and going through the process there too. So I think we have to recognize that in Montana we have really 2 worlds. We have the rural environment, small communities, and back up a second. The principle for me in education is help every child reach their full potential. That's what I think, and I always like to identify a principle that we can all agree on, so let's start there. My concern in rural Montana is that it's very hard to get the breadth of subject matter experts that you need to help every child reach their full potential. I was up in Saco recently. There's 44 kids K through 12, right? My concern is like Einstein, the next Einstein is born in Saco. Will we have a fabulous physics teacher there and calculus teacher? Well, I think there's a solution to that. We have the Montana Digital Academy. I'm a big fan. I would be investing more money in the Digital Academy because I think in these rural communities, I want those kids to have the same access and opportunity that people in larger communities like Bozeman have. Digital Academy allows us to bring more AP classes. It allows us to bring more dual credit classes, which I'm also supportive of. I think that would be a good thing. I think in our larger communities like Bozeman, you know, we have the ability to have more options for parents in how they educate. Options don't work in a small community because the economics don't support it. They do work in a larger community. And I believe as a dad, I've seen it firsthand, and many of you have as well. I mean, no 2 children are the same. And giving parents options, again, prevents us from having to stick our round peg in a square hole. You know, there was some work in this last session. I think that was progress for the state. I think there's probably more we could do.
You know, students who go through these education systems, lawyer, doctor, engineer, teacher, they accrue a lot of student loans. And that's just the nature of the system now.
Yeah.
What about the idea to get folks to go to rural communities and serve time there as a teacher or a doctor, maybe somehow helping underwrite, pay off the student loans to incentivize them to stay? And what will happen, I think, is once they're there a while, they're going to want to stay forever. And this puts this talent out in the entire state.
It certainly worked in medical residencies, where 70% of people entering medical residencies end up staying in the communities. New York State did something interesting, which I'm not advocating this as good policy, but it's an example of something like this. They said if you're a New York State resident and you go to a New York State university and you study engineering, okay, it's targeted at that. When you graduate, if you take a job in the state of New York, and you can deduct 20% of your college tuition every year for 5 years. And if you do the math on that, at 6.9% income rates in Montana and our college tuitions, basically the state says if you become an engineer and stay in the state, we'll pay for your tuition. And then the state gets the benefit from then on. I mean, today, one of the challenges we had in hiring, and I mention engineers because high tech creates jobs for all kinds of people, right? At right now, technology is only 10% of our expenses were software development. All the remainder were sales, marketing, administration, and then you put a high wage job in a community, and the next thing they do is buy or build a home, so it creates construction jobs. So it's a virtuous thing, but the techies are sort of like techies to a tech company are sort of like seed to a farmer. And without them, you don't get the rest of the crop. So New York State took this initiative, and it was done by a Democratic governor. Things like that could work if they're highly targeted. Right now, I think over 50% of our engineering grads from MSU leave the state when they graduate. If there was some incentive to keep them around, I think.
They have to pay those student loans.
Sure they do.
And they have fewer choices, quite frankly.
So kind of related to education, you said you defend our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
How far should that go? Should it include allowing guns on Montana university campuses?
Well, I believe that the Second Amendment is very clear. It says shall not be infringed, and that's what I believe.
So that's a yes.
I think when you remove guns from an environment, you create victim zones.
One of our other board members that's not able to be here today left a long list of questions.
Okay?
But I think that there's one that she would ask that if I said you can ask one, she would say, what are the top 3 or 4 things that most define you as a person? It's a pretty broad question, but a good one. And how would those things affect or influence your policy decisions?
Yeah. So I think the best way to answer that, probably you have better access than I do. You can talk to the hundreds and hundreds of people that have worked for me over the years here in Gallatin Valley. I mean, what you see is what you get with me. I'm a big believer in leadership. I mean, family's very important to me. I'm passionate about what I do. I love the outdoors. Here, I'm just giving you categories of things. I hunt and fish a lot. You know, I love the open spaces we have in the state. But at the end of the day, I tend to leave my personal things at home. And people that have worked with me, in fact, Jeff Krause made this comment as well, and there was an AP story recently here, quoted some of my former employees about the fact that, I mean, my faith is very important to me. I'm a Christian. Everyone at Right Now Technologies knew I was a Christian, but that had no bearing on who we hired or who we promoted, except that my Christianity influences the fact that you never have to guess whether I'm telling you the truth or not. I mean, integrity is extremely important. I think respect for the individual is extremely important. I mean, that's just a little flavor.
Okay.
So kind of on that, like there are clearly places in public policy where those sorts of values come to bear, right? So for example, Governor Bullock's expansion of non-discrimination, I think the non-discrimination policy, I think is probably the right word, recently being announced. Would you maintain that if elected? Or would you roll that back?
I don't agree with how he did it, because he did this kind of like a midnight executive order. But I don't disagree with the sentiment of that. In our business, we hired people solely based on their capability, and they got promoted solely based on their ability to contribute to the business. And I wouldn't run the state any differently.
So that's a no, you wouldn't pull that back?
I agree with the sentiment of it. I think people should be hired and promoted based on their ability, not irrelevant things. I mean, our First Amendment is very clear. It allows everybody to believe what they want, and it preserves their freedoms. And I think that applies to everybody.
So knowing that you follow politics closely and the last session closely, are there any of Governor Bullock's vetoes during the last session that you would have said, I agree with that?
Agree with the vetoes?
Yes.
You know, there were 124 of them.
Are there big ones that you would have agreed with on the, I guess, the bigger ticket items?
You know, I have more issues with the vetoes he actually issued, particularly on gun rights, the tax reduction bills. Those are the ones that really come forefront to me that I disagree with.
Okay.
So I think this fall, you know, it's a really good point, because this fall in November, Montanans are going to have a really clear choice, right? Because you have someone who has a record. They've grown up. They're a political insider. They've grown up inside Helena. It's lawyer by training, and you have somebody who's never run for public office, who's, you know, started and grown 5 businesses, and understands how to create jobs and create prosperity in a rural state like Montana. And I think if people want more of the same, well, they got a very clear choice. And if they want new leadership that's going to bring a new set of ideas up to Helena, they've got a very clear choice as well. And I think the root issue with our work ethic and our rich natural resources that can be responsibly developed, we want to preserve the environment as well, there's absolutely no reason why we're 49th in the country in wages, and our kids have become our most precious export. So sorry to go off on a little
it's okay.
tangent, but it's central to that question.
Yeah. So how specifically can government improve wages? I mean, I understand that you can entice businesses to come here, you can help people start businesses here. We've got a fairly low unemployment rate in Montana right now. You'd think that would raise wages, but it obviously is not. How how does business, how does government help do that?
Yeah, that's a really, that runs the central of the difference in the worldview between the current governor and myself. We do have low unemployment. The problem is we don't have enough high wage jobs. So the way you solve it, and honestly, I'll be the first one to say, government's not going to create the jobs. Government's going to create an environment that makes it easier to create the jobs. So where do we start? I just finished this regulation roundup. I went over all over the state, and hundreds of regulations. They're like, as I talk to small business owners, it's sort of like they're dying a death of 1,000 cuts. It's no one thing, it's a whole bunch of stuff. So we have to improve the regulatory environment to make it easier to start and grow a business. That's number one, and the state can do that. We can peel back some of this stuff, these rules. They're not all statutes. Some of them are just rules that are made by the agency. That's number one. Number two, we can put new leadership in place in the agency heads that actually, and bring a culture of customer service to the agencies rather than this culture of enforcement that we have today. We can also use the overpaid taxes that the state has collected to create a tax climate that is more favorable to businesses. I mentioned eliminating the business equipment tax. The current governor's on record vetoing a bill that would have reduced the business equipment tax in the 2013 cycle. Lower income and cap gains rates. I would also use some of this return some of the money in the form of lower rates to help make it better. So it's really about creating a climate that's easier to start and grow businesses. And there's, we heard all kinds of things on this regulation roundup. We were up in Thompson Falls, and there was somebody, and this is kind of a funny aside, but they were all worked up about the chicken tax. Montana charges 5 cents a head on every chicken that you own. And you got to inventory them at the beginning of February. And if you own 3 chickens, you owe the state a 15-cent check. And you've got to put a 49-cent stamp on the envelope to mail it in. And there's people in Helena processing 15-cent checks. We have licensure issues where we ask people to fill out a form, mail in a check. There's no certification, there's no test. And I think we heard about licensure over and over and over again all over the state. And now we need licenses. I'm not saying get rid of all licenses, but there are some that they just don't serve any purpose except to add overhead. If you want to be an electrical contractor, I was talking to one woman, her husband had to get 5 separate permits to do electrical work. Now he's been doing electrical work in another state for 20 years. But coming here, he had to fill out 5 separate forms, and all of them had a fee associated with it. This is the sort of stuff, we can just make it easier to start a business.
You mentioned you like to hunt and fish. Montana has one of the stream access laws that's been held up as exemplary by sportsmen around the country.
Yeah.
But it's being challenged, in particular in Madison County, I believe, from the CEO from the Cox Corporation, is challenging the law in court, charging that it's unconstitutional and denying his rights. As governor, would you be an advocate of Montana's stream access law, or do you think it should be amended?
Yeah, I am a supporter of stream access laws as they stand today. In fact, I personally own probably the closest river access to downtown Bozeman. We live on the East Gallatin, and in the summer we probably have 4 to 6 cars parked on our property there every single day, and we welcome people on our property. So I'm a beneficiary as well, because I go other places and I love to fish. So.
I have a question. What do you see state government's role in taking care of the at-risk population that is peppered throughout the state? Not only at-risk youth, but various communities of adults as well.
Yeah, so I've had a chance to tour out first the principle. I always like to start with the principle. Our state government has an obligation to take care of people that can't take care of themselves. I believe that's true. I think that's been transferred to government over the last 100 years or so, but it's clearly worn by government, and we have an obligation to do that.
So as a follow-up to that, what would be the kinds of programs you would promote that state government have for, let's say, at-risk youth?
Mm-hmm. I don't have the answers there exactly. I know that the single largest portion of our state budget is our Department of Health and Human Services. It's 42% of our state budget, and it's growing quickly. The way I approach any problem is we got to look at which programs are actually being successful and double down there and look at ones that may not be giving the results we want, and maybe we retrench a little bit. But I don't have a specific plan there yet. Yes?
What would you think about a bill, excuse me, a bill being brought forward to regulate control valves? This sounds a little strange, but 5 years ago we blew up downtown Bozeman. We couldn't turn the gas off because there were no main shutoffs. We have a sewer leak at Big Sky, which may or may not be an ice related, but there was an unmonitored valve there. Then we have 2 major oil spills in the Yellowstone, both of which either had non-working or else remotely controlled valves. It seems to be an ongoing thing, and I don't think that, my view is that private industry doesn't have very many incentives to do the proper thing on controlling flows of toxic materials. So it might require state action. So what about a bill that would reform control valve, safety valves that are also electronically monitored, so we know what's going on in real time with somebody actually watching the screens?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you'd have to look at the specifics of the bill. I mean, I agree with your premise that if there's a health and safety issue, as we've seen downtown, I'm not opposed to regulation to preserve health and safety of people. You have to also look at the burden that it places and make sure that we're solving a problem that is really systemic and not a one-off situation. Because the challenge with regulations is when you add them, it adds a burden on everybody. So I don't have a yes or no answer for you. It's really a question of balance. We certainly, and make sure we're solving a problem that needs to be solved.
Well, when we have these things, we have catastrophic expenses that are dispersed to somebody else because of the lack of a valve.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, just 2 quick things. One, how do you envision, if you're elected as governor, working with the legislature? Because they've kind of got their own agenda.
Yeah.
You can have some control as governor, but what do you see as different there? And then secondly, thank you for the civil approach to drawing distinctions between you and the current administration. No one wants to hear polarized hyperbole. Everybody wants specifics. And I think continue on the path you're doing here and draw those distinctions in a civil way would be beneficial.
Yeah, thank you, Don, and I appreciate that, because I've never gotten anything done in my career by being divisive, and I just don't. We see that now playing out in national politics too, and it's not. No one's really comfortable with it. So I think 90% of life is just showing up, and we've had a situation up in Helena where in this last legislature, I've reached out to a lot of people. And on both sides of the aisle, I've sat down, I've had coffees, I've probably done close to 800 one-on-one meetings in the last year. And that includes legislatures, heads of associations, timber people, mining people, healthcare people, nonprofit people, because I think it's important that we just sit down and have a relationship, because it's hard to get into a tense situation where you're discussing issues if there isn't a relationship to start with. I think there could be a lot more collaboration. I talked to legislators about the last session, and our current governor was running a marathon. Now, I like to work out, but you don't just go run a marathon. It takes hours of training every day for months in advance to get ready to run a marathon, and that was in the middle of the session. So I think the first thing is actually showing up to do your job. And you may have seen, if some of you have seen the schedule I've been maintaining around the state and visiting with people. I've been out in eastern Montana 9 times in the last year. They've never seen the governor out there. And I think part of the job is just showing up. And I'm ready to work with Democrats and Republicans that are willing to sit down and have a robust discussion around issues so that we can do the right thing for Montana. Because this is not a Democrat or a Republican issue as much as it is. We just need to solve some solutions, find some solutions.
Okay, so here's a divisive question.
Okay.
Bob categorized. You can't help him.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I recognize I'm on thin ice in even saying this. I went to a Grizzly game this last fall. and I wore a Grizz hat. And I walked into
We're running
Royce
for
Engstrom's,
office, that's okay.
I walked into Royce Engstrom's box at the game, the president of U of M, and he looks at me and he was shocked, and he said, "Damn, you look good in that cap." But I did tell him that if it was the Bobcat Grizz game, I'd have a Bobcat hat on.
At the Army-Navy game, the president spends one side on the Army and then walks across the field and spends the second half with the Navy.
Well,
Just a
let me-
tip.
Let me just go, this whole Bobcat Grizz thing has gone way too far. It's fine on the field, but I will tell you a couple of real world examples where it's gone too far. We had a full reimbursement plan for our employees to pay for college tuition. Any employee that wanted to go get a degree, an advanced degree that was at all related to the work they did, we'd do that. Every year for 10 years, I sat down with the head of the business department here at MSU and asked about an MBA program. And they said, no, it's not within our scope, we're not doing it. Well, 10 years in, for that entire period, U of M was running a remote MBA program on the MSU campus that the head of that department didn't know about and never told us about. It wasn't until after Oracle purchased our business that I learned U of M even had a computer science program. I just assumed they didn't, but no one ever brought it up. I was down in Laramie, Wyoming trying to find computer science graduates. So I think the Bobcat Grizz thing is fine. Let's leave it on the field.
All right.
Anything else, folks? All right, well,
Thank you very much.
yeah, appreciate you coming in and making the time for us, and I'm sure we'll see you around this way probably again.
Yeah.
It's just getting started for you, and maybe it doesn't feel like that, but there's a long way to go until November.
Well, we, at the end of the day, you know, my wife and I have talked about this. We have been so incredibly blessed with the success we've enjoyed here. We feel a deep obligation to give back and serve the state of Montana, if Montana's want us. But we're willing to put our time, our reputation, and our talents into this to create a better outcome for all Montanans.